Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Finance and Corporate Services Committee, where we will be dealing with our capital budget for 2025. To kick things off, Mr. Lautenbach.
There we go, just waiting for the slides. Well, good afternoon, Chair Davey and members of the committee. As indicated, we are kicking off the next day of budget discussions. We had some budget discussions last week, and we're now focused on the capital budget today. Following the discussion this afternoon, we also have public input night, which is scheduled for this evening, which will provide an opportunity for the public who wishes to come to speak to the budget. Following that process, based on the feedback that's received through these discussions, the Mayor will then propose a budget on December 2nd. That will then start a clock in terms of when amendments would be provided, if there are any, related to the budget, and final budget day would be scheduled for December the 12th. I do want to just highlight in particular, as this also relates to capital, again, a new tool within this year's budget package or information is an online tool called OpenBook through our budget software, Questica, and it allows you to look at major 2025 capital projects, look at a description of the project, what the relevant budget is associated with it, as well as a picture and the actual location where the work is contemplated across the city. I do want to highlight that the link that was provided on day one of the budget discussions was actually incorrect. It is kitchener.questica.openbook.com. I believe I indicated .ca at the time, so it is .com, and that's the direct link to the tool. You can also find a link directly from our budget website, kitchener.ca/budget, which has a direct link that will take you there as well. So I encourage members of council and the public to check out that new tool. This again is just a quick snapshot of kind of the main elements that make up the budget. So the operating budget, the capital budget, which we'll be talking about today and later on today as well. Mr. Hagee will cover off reserve and reserve funds. As a reminder, this year's budget really is based on three priority areas or themes. So delivering city services, and we talked a lot about that when we were talking about the operating budget. So that is the services that we provide each day to the residents of Kitchener. This year we've been able to maintain existing service levels within the budget that we're proposing, while also addressing some of our growth-related pressures as well. Today we'll be focused on investing in infrastructure in the capital budget, so both in terms of the assets that we're required to maintain in a state of good repair, but also talking about some of the new capital that helps support growth that we're seeing in the community as well. And then we'll also be talking about advancing street priorities, particularly related to one-time, $1 million in one-time capital funding that's available to further advance things that might be important to council and the community through the 2025 budget process. So we do have some time reserved for any discussion that takes place on that today. I think it's important to just remind council and also the public in terms of how do we establish the capital budget and capital forecast. And it really is related to a number of the formal processes that we have in place that go in advance of the budget coming forward. So in particular, we are required to have asset management plans that essentially identify the condition of our assets, and that helps to inform a lot of the rehabilitation work that you see within the budget. So the major renewal work related to our underground infrastructure, as an example, or even some of the other major asset categories. We're required to have those asset management plans under legislation, and to comply with that legislation, it helps to identify some of those priorities that you see within the capital budget. In terms of growth-related infrastructure, the development charge framework is what's typically been used to fund that infrastructure. As part of that, we actually are required to do a development charge study, and the last study was done, an update in 2022. And that identifies the capital needs in terms of the areas of the city that are experiencing growth. So in particular in the southwest area of the city, obviously a large project that we've broken ground on being the Kitchener Indoor Recreation Complex, plus the new library that's opening in the southwest city, which is also opening this year, are examples of projects that were funded from development charges. But obviously the main component of that as well is all the infrastructure that goes to supporting that new development. So the underground infrastructure, the roads, everything else that's needed, any growth-related infrastructure is funded through DCs. And then obviously through the strategic plan, there are initiatives that are identified by the community and supported by council that once that strategic plan is approved, you see alignment within the capital forecast in terms of items that help to advance that as well. And then there's a number of other processes throughout the year that would help inform specific projects that you might see within the capital forecast. When we think about a quick snapshot of the overall capital budget, there's about 470 projects in total with $1.9 billion in planned spending over the next 10 years. And as I've indicated, a large majority of it is related to infrastructure renewal. And so you see in the breakout, and which is also included in the budget summary, full road reconstructions, the water, sanitary, stormwater, investments make up a significant portion, more than 50% of the overall capital forecast. And then you have other important areas, such as facilities, which is, sort of that next asset class where we have been trying to put more funding towards facility priorities. And I think we've been able to do that in the short term. We're also continuing to look at ways that we can advance that further as we move forward. I think it's important to note that capital costs, in the past few years have increased at levels much higher than CPI, even when CPI was fairly high. So we saw at one point 30% increases in some of the costs associated with capital. We've seen that come down, but I think it's an important note to know that CPI doesn't always reflect the materials that go into supporting our capital program, and so there are some differences there. As I mentioned, capital funding, even though it seems like we are investing quite a bit in infrastructure, and we are, we still have shortfalls in terms of how much we need to be putting towards capital in different areas. As I mentioned, facilities being one area where there is a significant gap that we've been trying to close. But we know that in order to do that, we can't always just rely on the tools that we have to be able to make progress. So property taxes and utility rates only go so far. We know that the federal and provincial funding is needed to fully address this issue, and that's an issue that's not just specific to Kitchener. That's an issue that all municipalities in Ontario and Canada face in terms of aging infrastructure and the need for more funding. So that gives a quick snapshot of the overall capital budget. We are going to get into more detailed discussions on this today. Before we do, I do want to just follow up with some discussion that took place on day one, which is related to budget communication. I know there was some discussion about the fact that Kitchener only represents about 30% of the tax bill, but it is important to have a narrative in terms of the services that we do provide and the value that we provide for residents of Kitchener. And so I'm going to invite our Director of Communications, Bethany Rowland, to come up and speak to this issue. But I'll pause there. Chair,
if you don't mind, just Bethany, if you can hang on for just 1 second. We do have one question, Councillor Arnaitis.
Thank you, Chair Davey, and thanks, Jonathan, for coming in and giving us this presentation. As always, it's always informative and very excellent work by all our various departments and everything. I guess the question I have is, and I think I've had this conversation with you, but I just want to bring it on a broader level. I'm seeing a lot of late about DC charges and in general, and there is a lot of advocacy saying out there that DC charges is a big tax towards housing, and just wondering if there's anything that we can do to be proactive in the sense of, my gut feeling is that it's going to be something that might be looked at from the province to remove completely, and I'm just wondering if there's anything out there that we can at least let us sleep at night, knowing that we have something in the works that can help relieve some of that.
So through the chair, certainly development charters has been a useful framework in terms of helping to support growth that is occurring in the community. There has been changes to legislation over the past few years, which has both been negative but also positive in terms of how some of those changes have been received in terms of the impact that it has on municipalities. The one thing that I can say is a lot of the narrative related to development charters being a significant cost. I think if you look at the GTA, certainly development charges in that area are significantly higher than what our development charges are within the region of Waterloo and Kitchener. When we took a look at sort of what DCs make up in terms of a percentage of the average household in terms of sales price, it would be about 2% of that total cost. So when you think about what 2% provides in terms of what we provide as a city through development charges in terms of supporting all the infrastructure that's needed to support that growth that's occurring, plus all of the important amenities that new residents would expect when they come to live in Kitchener, I think it actually provides great value in terms of what it is providing in terms of that framework. So I think that's one of the key messages, is that obviously our development charges are lower than in other areas. And I think we always take the same approach as we take to when we set the budget. When we look at that, understanding what that balance is between affordability and what that pressure looks like for the infrastructure that it's actually providing through that framework.
Okay. Yeah, I see it's becoming quite alarming for me, seeing all the discussions with DCs of late, and I know how valuable they are to us as a municipality, and I'm not an advocate to eliminate them, but I do recognize for ourselves we are lower than most jurisdiction, but I really do believe that we need to think a little further out of the box on this one and be prepared for when. If anything does happen, because I feel like something will eventually force our hands.
Thank you. Actually, just before we drop that, I know it is a bit off topic, but when is the next plan? Like, my understanding is we can't really change anything in the middle of our DC period of bylaw. So when's the next time we would be looking at our DC bylaws?
So to the chair, the earliest that we'd be looking at that in terms of our normal schedule would be 2027. 2022 was the time frame where we provided the last update. There is the ability to update it sooner. I think what we are planning is just following the normal course in terms of what that timeline looks like, at least at this point, and doing the best we can with the changes that have taken place through legislation over the past few years.
Okay, and is that something that we could, if council decided to bump up, if we wanted to look at that sooner than later? And the only reason I ask is I do have, and I don't know if it's possible, I do have some thoughts and questions as well in terms of any possible ways that we could make the DC charges more, looking into it, I don't want to take in less money. We obviously have money spent in the Southwest, et cetera, but being more progressive in the way that we do assign the DC charges to different housing types. So with that, I'm assuming we don't have the ability to change that until we do the full review in 2027.
So to the chair, yes, we'd have to do a full review to take into consideration a different way of how we distribute DCs. I know we have sort of that two-tier system in terms of what we look at. If council was interested in doing something different, it would be the full DC study that we'd have to undertake in order to make any significant changes.
Okay, well, I'll park that for now. Thank you. Ms. Rowland, I think you're taking over here. Afternoon. Oh, second. There you go.
All right, through you, Chair Davey. I am here to just briefly respond to council questions and requests around communications and advertising related to budget specifically and city services more generally. So we heard council's feedback both last week and in previous years around the desire to increase resident understanding around the multiple components of their tax bill, specifically city's component being about 30%, and more generally helping residents better understand the broad range of programs and services that are provided to them within the city's portion of the property tax bill. So stepping back, we appreciate and understand that this public education plays an important role in increasing resident trust in government, resident satisfaction, and strong brand connection. I will briefly talk about what we're doing ongoing to communicate about city budget and services, and then make a recommendation to reach some of the harder to reach audiences. Oh, someone has taken an old slide, so there's a gap there, but that's okay. So existing communications around budget. You heard some of this last week, so I won't go into it too deeply, but we have about 38,000 bill inserts, hard copies, that are distributed in June, plus a digital ad through e-billing. We have a whole bunch of videos around budget that we share regularly, including the two most popular, How Your City Budget Works and Region versus City. That could probably use a better name. We have a lot of social media that goes out. There was a screenshot of one of them, but you've probably seen them all yourself recently. And we also do public engagement every year around the budget. And we turn the budget doc into a plain language, more easily accessible document for people to consume. Moving on to existing communications around city services. So just a note that staff across the organization, not just my team, but staff throughout the city communicate every single day about the programs and services that are offered through the City of Kitchener, and we always try our best to ensure that content, materials, graphics, etc., are strongly connected to our brand and to the City of Kitchener, so that people understand that it's being provided by the City of Kitchener. So a few examples. We issue 15 to 20 news releases and news posts every month. We issue 600 to 700 social media posts and videos every single month. We have 4 active Kitchener publications a year, 4 Kitchener Life publications a year. We have community center and neighborhood association newsletters, planning postcards, construction project signage, branded fleet vehicles, special events, radio ads, billboards, digital advertising, et cetera, et cetera. So on the screen, what you see is an example of one campaign that we did in 2022. It's called We Are Kitchener, and it was a direct result of council requests around communicating more about City of Kitchener services. Hopefully some of you remember it. It included geo-targeted display ads online to Kitchener residents, bus shelters, ion shelters, paid social media and videos, and a website landing page. So we know that our messaging is not reaching everyone. We agree that it's important to reach as many people as possible. It's really tricky for residents who are living in this community to understand taxation and service differentiation in a two-tier government setting. We will continue to share our messaging, but realize that this is not a problem that will be solved exclusively by more communications. Moving forward to try to reach some harder to access audiences, we're recommending a radio campaign. So this would be for 2025, including a series of ads during and after the budget process, and then an ad right before a tax bill goes out, just as a reminder that the 30% of that tax bill goes to the City of Kitchener. And then we can also do digital advertising. So we can geo-target ads to Kitchener residents, so people would see these ads across a whole bunch of different websites, and you would only see them if you're a City of Kitchener resident, and they could take you to a landing page and give information about, the 30% if you're not choosing to click in. So there's a whole bunch of different options we can do. My team's going to take it away, look at budget, and make a good recommendation for how we can move forward with trying to capture hard-to-reach audiences.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rowland. There are a couple questions. First, Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Davey, and thanks, Ms. Rowland, for coming in and talking about what you've been able to do and are planning on doing. I know that you did some Twitter posts. I'm allowed to say that word, recently, and I appreciated them. I was able to repost those, and I think that those are really important. And I agree with you. Is there some free ways for us to try and get our message out about this? The radio campaign, the digital advertising, that's really great. That is going to cost us some money. I'm wondering if we have considered using our billboards that we have at our community centers, because that's some free ways that we could be doing that. I know when I'm stopped at the stoplight, I'm always reading what is on the billboard, so maybe that's something that we could explore doing as well. And that's right in our neighborhoods. That's right in all of our wards.
Certainly, that's something we'll take away, and it's a good suggestion. There's no cost to it, so we often use those digital signs for days of significance, et cetera, so I'll take that away. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it was a quirk in the system, but I did have Councillor Michaud and Councillor Singh in the queue. They disappeared. Okay, there's Councillor Michaud. Go ahead. Councillor Singh, if you can queue back in.
Thank you, Ms. Rowland, for sharing all this information with us, and I appreciate you coming out today. And actually, I was just going to say the same thing that Councillor Johnston said about the community centers. I think they are the hub of the wards that we represent, and I think that'd be a good place to start. Also, I know that on the tax bills, when it comes in the mail, it's bold. It's in bold of what the region pays, and like what we pay the region and what the region pays and what everybody where your tax bill is going. I wonder if there's any way to change the color or something, like maybe if we just did something more subtle like that, if that's possible.
Sure, we can look at that. I don't think I have a copy of the tax insert in front of me, but I believe it's green and gold. So certainly we can look at the color. I also looked into, Councillor Ioannidis, you'd asked about printing something on the envelopes, and with our current print vendor, it's not possible. So we can look at, small ways to make it more clear.
Appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a movement in the right direction with the feedback that was given during the operating budget about more clarity, exactly what the City of Kitchener, how we are enabling our tax base as opposed to others, not as necessarily as a contrast, but for a better understanding and awareness. And one of the things that, it's one thing of having a very clear outline, this is what the region charges, this is what the city charges, that's absolutely, I think, more clarity is required. I don't think we've settled there yet. We got to explore that further. But I think from your perspective in communications, that involves a longer discussion, more data, more information, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think those that want to seek that out, that should definitely be available, and through online, through the community centers, all the great ideas that have already been offered. I just want to add on further with community associations. Various associations have different epithets of social media following. And if you can connect and see who has, 1,000 plus members in the community, and then we can post some of this information through there, social media posts, be it Twitter or Facebook, I think that would get a lot of active eyes as well. The last thing I really want to say is more of a comment, not a question. Mr. Chapman will, attest to this. I hark on this on a repetitive basis. It's not just what you're doing, it's also focus on what you've done, adds clarity of what, that what you've done created benefit. It improved the services, improved lives. So I think some of this information, it shouldn't be not just how much we're charging, why we're charging you this, but outside of the normal budget, when we've had various years, additional discretionary amounts. And I'm very proud of that. This council has continually delivered a budget that allows some extra beyond, the basic or the legislative required services that the Kitchener has to offer. Let's talk about what those successes came out of. So if there's a way of creating that narrative, I think that brings people more in the fold, and I think it encourages them to seek out more information as well, because they see that we're doing well and we're doing good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is no one else in the queue. Thank you for pulling this together in response to committee's concerns on relatively short notice. Thanks so much. Up next, Mr. Haggis taking over again. Just give it a second until the microphone comes up here. Hang on. There you go. Oh, wait, no.
All right.
Not sure. Oh, there you go.
So coming back to a discussion as well, this is a slide that was, or a section that was inserted just like the last one to what is printed in your budget book. Is we said last week that we would come back to the discussion about strategic additions. There's the $1 million that's already been alluded to this morning or this afternoon for council direction as far as one-time funding of $1 million that could be put towards things that council thinks is a priority. And so we just wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity again this week for council to discuss or provide input before the mayor proposes the budget. Just a reminder, it is one-time funding, so it should be put toward a one-time use, not an ongoing program, because the funding would run out and we'd have no way to continue funding it. But we want to have a bit of a discussion or have an opportunity for council to discuss and provide input right now.
Very good. Questions of staff. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Just a quick question. If we were to put that $1 million towards the tax levy, what would that reduce it by?
Sure. So I think it was asked last week, it's funding from a reserve. It would just go back to the reserve. It would not be used to reduce taxes. Because again, it's a one-time use, so we would automatically have to increase it, so it would just go back to the tax capital reserve and be available for council future direction if it wasn't decided through this.
Thank you.
Sorry, just before you go on, just clarification on that though, maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought in past years when there was a capital allocation to the levy, there was at least a recommendation by staff, like not that I'm supportive of it, but that you'd want to divide it over 10 years. So it would be like, if we were intent on putting it towards the levy, it would be something like $100,000 addition versus the full $1 million.
So true, that can happen. It gets pretty convoluted, and it would be less than 0.1%. So we're talking like
Pretty much the same levy amount, generally.
yeah, it might be 3.89 at best. It's probably still going to round to 3.9.
That's helpful, thank you. Councillor Singh?
Yeah, this is going to be a question to Denise, Ms. McGoldrick. A few years past, and we were just having this conversation, unfortunately, the success of it wasn't as I had really intended. We had additional monies from a federal tax reserve fund, and that was $750,000 approximately. That was divvied up across 10 wards. The amount came only 50 because we had estimated that they would be staff time that would be revolved into allocating those funds. Did staff do a final summary on that overall allotment of what happened with it, what benefits came out of it, what capital initiatives were done?
Ms. McGoldrick?
Through the chair, this was a few years ago, so I do recall that there was specific outreach to each individual ward councillor several times in follow-up. I also believe that there was a request to potentially reallocate those monies, and there was a follow-up associated with that. I don't believe a full comprehensive list of where the monies were out, like a full summary was provided, but that is certainly something we can look at providing if that's of interest.
Okay, I'm not really proposing that this extra allocation should necessarily be done the same way, but the fact that we had something like this and seeing as a council of how those monies were spent or where they went may be helpful just to have an overall summary. So I'll leave that with staff.
Any other questions on the $1 million allocation? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we can continue.
All right, so we will move ahead to the capital budget, and we'll start off by talking about funding. So what funds the capital budget before we talk about specific projects that are included in it. We've got funding that comes in from various sources shown on the graphic here. The donut chart shows that more than half of the funding is coming from enterprises. Primarily, it's the WIP utilities, so water, sanitary, and stormwater. They fund a lot of road reconstructions. This has already been talked about briefly this afternoon. They also have projects that they fund themselves as far as their sewer mains and meters and all of those sorts of things. So a large portion of our capital budget is related to funding coming from the enterprises. Development charges is the next one that we've talked about already here this morning. About 16% comes from that and is funding for growth-related infrastructure, whether it's hard infrastructure like engineering things in the roads and roadway, or if it's facilities and parks and those types of recreational things that people enjoy. But that fully funds new items as opposed to rehabilitating existing infrastructure. The capital pool is the next largest at 11%. That's predominantly funding for tax-supported services to rehabilitate and replenish those. And then there's funding that comes from various reserves or grants, and each of those is less than 10%. In the grand scheme of things, enterprises are by far the largest funder of our capital program, followed by everything else. This slide just shows the change from last year's 10-year forecast to this year. So last year, the total forecast or total 10-year capital budget was about $1.8 billion. This year, it's about $1.9 billion. You can see that relatively the changes aren't significant aside from in enterprises, about $100 million new dollars being forecast over the next 10 years. And again, that's for road reconstructions and rehabilitation of water mains, sewer mains, and the like in their capital programs. We'll have the capital pool, and again, that funds the rehabilitation of tax-supported programming. It comes from 4 different lines or 4 different areas. The capital out of current, so that's a transfer from the operating budget into the capital budget. to fund that. We also issue some debt, which we'll be talking about shortly. And then we have investments in our gas utility and our hydro utility. They pay us dividends. And so we take some of those funds and reinvest them in our capital program. And just a reminder, closing off this section, is if there are changes that are made to the capital forecast, there's going to be an impact. And so it could be we're adding something in, but we're taking something else out as far as a capital project goes. We're funding something, but we're we're adding in a new project, but we're funding it from a reserve. It could be that we're adding something and reducing the tax levy, adding something and increasing the tax levy, or adding something and funding it from debt. And the impacts of each of those are there, whether it's a current impact or a future impact. It depends what council's direction is. I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, before we move to debt.
Thank you. There is one question, Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And thank you. This is always an exciting part of the budget. My question is around road reconstruction timelines. Mm-hmm. How accurate are our road reconstruction timelines?
They change every year. There's an issue paper in this year's budget that shows the changes from year to year based on whatever updated information we have. Generally, though, there's a long lead time for them, so we don't, once we're in the process of planning on something, we generally would deliver on it. It's just, have we started the planning for it yet, yes or no? But once we get to, say, year one and we've actually got money and we're planning it, the project would generally be completed in the timeline that you would see in the budget.
So they should be like within, if it's a year out, it should be within like the next 3 years or something that it should be starting?
Oh, the time to deliver. So the physical construction of it would take, if it's budgeted in 2025, it would likely begin in 2025. It may carry over into 2026. And then there's usually a final asphalt thing that happens a couple of years later. So if you're living in the neighborhood, it may feel like your road is being under construction for 5 years. The reality is it's probably maybe split over 1 or 2, and then there's something where we come back a few years later to just put the top coat on.
May I add a comment?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I have certain neighborhoods in my ward where people know where their road reconstruction has been in the budget for quite some time, and I'm concerned that when they see the number in here, but maybe if they speak with a staff person about that upcoming piece, they're told it will be a date that's maybe 3 to 5 years later than what we have in the budget. So that's what makes me concerned about whenever we print these numbers. I know that depending on when things come up, that there could be extenuating circumstances, like, inflation, et cetera. But I'm concerned about, us being able to stick to a timeline, or maybe having it ensure that it's as realistic as possible.
Mm-hmm. So through the chair, it is as realistic as possible. There are many circumstances that change, including we have to coordinate with regions sometimes. So it's not only our program and what makes sense for us, but also what aligns with them. We don't want to have a whole area inaccessible because they're doing a project and we're doing, so we try to coordinate as best we can with them. We are only indicating 5 years now. Previously, we had indicated 10, and realizing that it's very unlikely that we were going to do a project in year 9 in the time frame that we thought we were, just because there are so many variables with pricing, project coordinating, and all of that sort of stuff. So we reduced down to 5. And again, once a project starts into the planning process, it will generally be carried forward through construction as opposed to identifying something. So if it's out in year 5, it still might be less likely to happen in that time frame. If it's in year 1, it's going to happen unless there's something catastrophic that goes on.
Mr. Riedman, to add?
Through the chair, and so in addition to these projects being multi-year and sometimes having to be realigned based on other infrastructure pressures, sometimes a water main, we find out that it's in a different project is in worse state of repair than another one, and so we have to reprioritize projects. I just want to flag that in the multi-year budget, the first year is typically design work, and so that's the smaller value that's in there. And so when people see that first number in there, it's not necessarily the start of construction, it's actually the start of the design of the project. And then depending on the other utilities that are included, we have to phase the work with KW Hydro or gas to make sure that we only have one contractor in the right-of-way at a given time for insurance purposes and legislative requirements.
Can I ask you a question then as well? Is there a way of updating the ward councillor then to let them know that the timelines have changed? Maybe it's something that maybe every 6 months or something, so that when we get questions, we can keep our neighbors updated?
Through the chair, so I'd be happy to talk to the team about making sure that we're updating the councillors on their local projects on a periodic basis.
Thank you.
That was a good suggestion. I think, yeah, even if it's annually for me, it would be good to know if there's any material changes in the ward that we represent. So thank you for looking into that. Up next, we have Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question about, this slide that you just showed us is called Adjusting the Capital Budget. So my question is, as part of this whole budget process, and speaking about capital projects, is there actually room to make adjustments to what's being proposed to us here? And if so, can you give us details on how much we're talking, financially and in dollar values, and some of the projects that would be adjustable at this stage?
So through the chair, the budget as presented is fully funded, so we don't have wish list items included in the 10-year capital forecast. These are projects that need to be done for various reasons, because the infrastructure is old, because there's growth pressures, because there's a rationale for each of them. I don't know exactly what you mean by room, or I think it's essentially it would be at the will or desire of council to adjust. We believe that the 10-year capital forecast reflects the interest of council and the community based on lots of feedback. There was the one previous slide that talks about all the different ways we receive feedback. And so we believe that it's reflective of all of that.
Okay, so just for an example, I guess. So in my ward, there's a big push to get more parkland, which means parkland acquisition. And anything to do with parkland that I've seen in the budget so far doesn't actually talk about, going out and buying new parkland in the areas, not just my ward, but in the wards that are lacking in parkland. And there's nothing in the 10-year forecast for that. So I just wondered at what stage can that be inserted to ensure that we're covering that need. So it's not just a want. I think I would like to consider it a need.
So we have you'll see in the reserve section, there's a reserve called the Recreational Land Reserve, and that's where the funding, the Parkland Dedication Reserve, as some people may refer to it. There's funding in there. I believe when there are specific properties that would come, that would be targets for acquisition, that would be a separate report. So it's not included in the budget right now as a guesstimate of what we might buy and when. We have targeted properties that we're going to purchase.
Mr. Riedmund.
And through the chair, in addition, council may recall in the city's strategic plan, there is a project listed in there, which is strategic parkland acquisition. And so that's following the development of the Places and Spaces master plan. And so that work is planned to come to council in 2025.
So you're suggesting that line of parkland acquisition won't come until the next budget in 2026?
Through the chair, if there is an acquisition that we're made aware of, we would definitely work towards that. But we are working on a broader strategy for implementation of the Places and Spaces strategy.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, Chair, just a response to the previous councillor, there is an issue paper on page G16, and this was implemented starting last year, which talks about the road reconstruction changes in priority. And so it lists 8 projects that have changed in priority on that issue paper as well.
Yeah, like the second or third last page in your package here. Up next is Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I just want to carry on with a theme about road repairs. I think Councillor Johnston has addressed part of my question. Having that update is very helpful for members of council. I've had the same issue myself as well. But I wanted to kind of address, where do we lie relative to this is an overall general question regarding road repair, if we're budgeting appropriate amount with other communities, like in a forecast replacing roadways, how do we fare, or even repairing, how do we compare it with others? Have we done an assessment?
So Mr. Reedman's going to take that one. Go ahead.
Through the chair, so there are two parts of it. There is the pavement quality index, and so that is something that we monitor frequently. And as noted in one of the issue papers relating to an engineering project, our pavement quality index is better than the average target. And then there's also the WIP program, which is the full reconstruction program, which we do have, as council knows, that we do have a slight deficit that we are working towards closing that gap on.
So the reason why I asked this question is more, so we have the extra million. One of the things that we keep on talking about is also looking at our core services, parks, potholes, I don't know what the other one is, pipes. But with the potholes, this is not part of the WIP program, but general repair whenever, roads deteriorate, but there's decades in advance when the full reconstruction will happen. So what I'm hearing is our program is better than other cities. Are we already faring well?
Ms. McGuire?
Anecdotally, I have some issues on some streets, but that could be just one particular neighborhood.
Yeah, through the chair, as Mr. Reedman mentioned, we do annually monitor for the pavement quality index, and that is a general overview in terms of the condition of our road networks. We also have road patrol and regular pothole monitoring. And so on a daily basis, we have road operators out doing road patrol to assess pavement discontinuities like potholes, and then immediately dispatching staff to address the potholes through kind of an asphalt repair mechanism. And so that happens throughout the year. In particular, we know that when we have a lot of freeze-thaw cycles, that can exacerbate the pothole issue. And at that time, those times of the years, we may have a backlog of potholes to address, and we realign resources to assign staff to maximize the number of staff out addressing potholes. So those are kind of those daily measures to improve the quality of the road in the interim until they become candidates for road rehabilitation.
So really my question lied where, in case staff feel that you should be addressing more, but I'm hearing that we do have a good program. In monitoring, do we use any sensor data where it's enacted on top of our machinery, which is actively going across the city, that can automatically detect, as opposed to visually having to go and check?
Yep, so we do have equipment on our road patrol to assess, to be able to pick up those surface discontinuities. We also use camera technology, and then we also use geotab technology across our equipment, which also picks up various vehicle data in terms of how, what that piece of equipment is experiencing out in the field.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, just before we move on, just by way of comment, sometimes I get a little puzzled because my anecdotal understanding in the city of Kitchener and really mostly like Canada-wide is that our road qualities are really good. I mean, anyone that's driven even south of the border, sometimes I wonder when I read the concerns about road quality, and certainly there's the odd road here and there. I've had the odd road here and there in my ward that needs to be done, but when it comes to road quality in the city of Kitchener, I've always thought that we're pretty lucky, and a lot of the folks I think that have serious concerns maybe aren't really comparing us to other parts of the world. So I'm probably going to catch hell for mentioning this, but that's my anecdotal belief. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, just quickly as a reply, I think we can always do better, but it could be that I just have really bad shocks, so.
You do drive a sports car, buddy. Okay, Mr. Hattie, take us along.
All right, we'll move on to debt, which is the next portion to consider. As a reminder, debt is borrowing that the city has taken on for capital purposes. We cannot issue debt for operating budgets or deficits. It has to be to fund a capital project. So in your personal example, it may be something like a mortgage you have to purchase your house. For the city, it's kind of a locked mortgage. It's closed, so once we issue the debt, the term is fixed, the rate is fixed, we can't go back and try to pay it off early, we can't go and try to negotiate a better rate because the rates come down. It's fixed for the term of the debt. Generally, we issue 10-year debt. For some larger things, we may do something longer, like 20. This graphic shows the debt levels starting from 2024 to 2034. I'll draw your attention to the green and yellow, kind of at the bottom portion. For the last number of years, and showing through this forecast, our debt levels, the green being our tax capital debt, enterprise debt, and then our EDIF debt are the yellows. You can see that those levels are generally fairly stable and somewhat decreasing. And so for the last number of years, our debt levels have been coming down. The blue section that you see added on to this year's graph is the DC-related debt. And it's already been mentioned here today. There are some larger growth-related capital projects that we are funding through development charges, and we still need to issue debt for those. All of the debt will be repaid by development charges, assuming the framework doesn't get completely eliminated, but there should be no impact to existing ratepayers. It should be funded completely by future development charge payers, so future housing. So you see kind of the increase in 2024 going up in 2025 and then being paid off over the next number of years. We would plan to issue that debt since it's large facilities that would be good for the community for a number of years. That debt will probably be a longer term, like perhaps 20 years, and would be paid off over time. I will pause there before development charges is the very next thing we will talk about, but we can talk about debt.
Yeah, there's two in the queue on debt. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, of course, now is not the time with the interest rates being higher and unnecessarily taking on extra debt where we don't have to. But in the past, we have had, opportunities where very low interest rates availability, knowing that we have a substantive deficit in our facility management. Have we considered or are addressing the look if the opportunities avail themselves when interest rates start coming down significantly lower in the future, that we try to take on the debt to take care of those repairs as opposed to lingering them on and exacerbating the conditions of the facility where the overall replacement or rehabilitation would cost a lot more in the future as opposed to taking care of it sooner?
I can start. Through the chair, it's something we would definitely consider. We haven't modeled that yet, but yes, that's something as we get better information on the condition of our assets and if there are specific projects that need to be done that are critical, that's a conversation we would advance with council before going in.
And sometimes that's I think the benefit and wisdom that you attain by being around a little longer and having going through a time where interest rates were high, then very low. I feel like we didn't necessarily take strategic advantage. So if that trend is coming downward, that may be an encouragement for staff for us to address or have a future report that outlines that.
Mr. Lautenbach, Dad?
So through the chair, that's certainly something that we can look at as we move forward and consider facilities. It has been something that we have done in the past in terms of even last year we did issue some debt more than we have specifically to address some of our facility-related challenges. I think, if you look at the total debt that we are looking to bring on, particularly even related to DCs, we are always watching kind of cash flow considerations, where interest rates are. We're putting off, how much debt we're actually taking on, because we do have a debt policy as well that we need to adhere to as well. But obviously, when rates come down, that is the time where we would consider it potentially as a tool, but we want to make sure that with the significant amount of debt, specifically related to DCs, that we're not taking on too much debt, and so that's why you have to factor in the total debt outstanding as part of that consideration as well. So it's not to say that we wouldn't do it, but I think it would be something that we would look at as a larger strategy in terms of addressing sort of our asset-related needs.
Just before we leave this unrelated, because it's a good question, I'm aware that, FCM and AMO, others are looking for a new deal, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, in terms of sustainability for municipalities. But I don't recall the last time we had an asset management presentation, and I am really curious if staff can comment then. My concern right now as we go through our budgets is to ensure that we are at least average and ideally above average in terms of our facility maintenance compared to other municipalities. So does staff have that information? They comment on that generally?
So through the chair, we have not at this point benchmarked ourselves versus other municipalities. We're currently working on the next step of our asset management plan for figuring out, for meeting legislative requirements. So that will be coming back to council with proposed levels of service by July 1st, 2025.
Oh, okay, something to look forward to there then, all right. Or maybe not look forward to, anyway. Ms. McGoldrick, do you want to add?
Yeah, and just maybe to follow up, we did provide an asset management report in May to council in terms of facilities and other assets, and that was to meet the current level of service requirements with the legislation, and now we're looking at proposed service levels, as Mr. Hagee indicated. So that report will be in about the same time frame in 2025.
Okay, very good, thank you. Up next is Mayor Rabinovich.
Thanks very much, Chair Davey, and thanks to staff for their good work on the budget. Just further to the question of sort of the debt that we're going to be taking in higher interest rates right now, and I think there's been a special meeting called at the region for December 9th or something like that, when we're going to be approving the acquisition of debt, and I noted that a chunk of it is Kitchener's request. But I guess my question is it possible for us, in anticipation that rates may be coming down in the next little while, to actually take shorter term debt than 20 years right now, and then renegotiate it in a year or two when rates are likely going to be lower?
So through the chair, the debt we're issuing here in the fall is 10-year, and it's generally the capital pool debt, not the longer-term DC debt. We are holding off on issuing that specifically for the Kitchener Indoor Recreation Facility or Center. We understand that that's a big cost. We're going to be carrying it for a while. We believe we can cash flow for the time being, and we're waiting until hopefully rates continue to come down, and we'll look to do that either in the spring or fall of next year. So even though council has already approved the debt, we're holding off on issuing it for cash management purposes.
Mr. Lautenbach, to add?
Yeah, so through the chair, and just to add on to Mr. Hagee's comments, we actually did put off, after the last couple of years, the amount of debt that we were planning to issue, because we wanted to wait for interest rates to come down. We have seen that they are starting to come down, so even the fall issue for the region is lower than what rates were, even a year ago. We're expecting they'll continue to go down going into the spring, and so we have been waiting to issue that DC debt until we see those rates come down further. The debt that we have issued is 10-year debt, and we will take a look at that to see does it make sense where that might be a possibility when we get to that point. But we have been looking at our cash flow, managing it responsibly, trying to push that off as far as we can to make sure that we're taking advantage of the most favorable interest rates when we do issue that debt.
So from if I understood what you're saying correctly, prior to, again, I think the date has been December 9th, there'll be a determination made whether or not we should do it as 10-year or potentially shorter, or because I think the amount for Kitchener, if I read correctly, was like 88 million or something.
So through the chair, our amount's actually less than that in terms of what we're issuing in the fall. It is 10-year debt just for the fall, and that's been confirmed. Okay. So the next time that we would consider how much debt we're also bringing on would be in the spring, in terms of spring debenture, potentially then looking further out to another fall debenture. But we're doing that, and we did it intentionally to make sure that we're taking advantage of the most lowest rates possible when we have to issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just before I leave this, I just wanted to comment, again, if I could briefly, because it's no surprise I'm a debt-averse guy, generally speaking, unless there's a really good reason for it. But looking at this chart, I'm really happy to see the forecast even going out many years. Even though it looks like it's flatlining in a lot of spaces, those of us that follow it a bit understand that even if your debt stays the same, inflation kind of reduces the actual value of that debt. So I'm just happy to see that Kitchener's in a very good position, especially with respect to debt that will be on the backs of taxpayers. Mr. Hagee, please continue.
All right, development charges are the next portion we will consider. There's already been some discussion, but these are costs that are paid to the city, and then we turn around and use them to build growth-related infrastructure for new residents. The overall idea is that growth should pay for growth, and they're under the Development Charges Act, so we don't just make up rules and what have you. We completely follow the Development Charges Act and the things that are required. As has already been talked about a little today, we updated our DC bylaw in 2022, so it came into force July 1st, 2022. Our current bylaw will expire naturally on June 30th, 2027. So we're planning to kick off the project in 2026 and then have everything together and in front of council so that it can be updated before the bylaw expires. The graph on this slide is different than what you have in your printed material. The one that was in there, I neglected to update. This is the revised projection for the DC reserve, so I just wanted to make sure that was pointed out to everybody. You can see that the reserve balance is kind of toggling back and forth between in a surplus position and a deficit position over the next few years. We have projects that we need to fund. We're also, as has been mentioned, planning to issue debt, so it just kind of jumps around a little bit. By the time, sort of at the end of this graph, it will return to, we expect that the DC reserve balance will return to a positive position by the end of it, and as we're considering in the next DC bylaw update, we'll look to have a positive balance in our DC reserve going forward. I'll just pause there if there are questions about DCs.
Just one question, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. One of the things that I, as a councillor, have been asked of by developers, and it's not currently permitted, is the deferring of development charges until occupancy, because the development charges are collected up front. That adds to the overall cost of the project. So if it were to come into effect, the deferral of development charges, how would that affect us?
So I guess generally we would get our money later, so you would see it would have a detriment to the city's cash flow as far as it goes. So assuming we're supposed to get $10 million a year, we would get that 10 million, but it might not be in that year, it would be at some point. And so generally with the growth-related infrastructure, we have to put it in first, and then developers build, and then we get reimbursed kind of through DCs after the fact. So we need to build the road, put in a pipe, all of those sorts of things before they can do it. So it would have a negative impact on our cash flow, assuming that it's just a deferral as opposed to forgiveness or they don't have to pay. We would be fully paid. But it would be a cash flow problem, as the chair already pointed out. If they're still only paying $10 million, but it's 2 years from now, that $10 million is worth a bit less than it would be if we had that money today.
Okay, and then this one, if you need to take time to answer this one, that's fine. But one of the other comments we hear is, well, once the new dwellings are up and occupied, that's a benefit to the tax base. So, depending on the number of units we could add per year. Can you explain how that improves the tax base?
Sure. So as a new house comes on, that's tax revenue that we weren't getting before. So it's absolutely new revenue to the city, but there's also the cost of services that we now need to provide. We need to plow a road that we didn't have before. We need to cut grass in a subdivision we didn't have before. We need to inspect a park we didn't have before. So it's not free money to the city. We still have those costs, and so that comes in each year. We talk about assessment growth. That's that new revenue to us, but we also show here the growth-related cost impacts that we have. And some years, the assessment growth pays or more than pays for the growth in service. Other years, it doesn't. This is one of the years it doesn't.
Okay, I appreciate the explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deneau?
Thank you, Chair Davey. Mr. Haggie, I'm just curious, when are DCs paid to the city?
Generally, they are paid at building permit issuance. In kind of the old rules, that's the only time they were paid. Under some of the provincial legislative changes more recently, there are deferred payments to points in the future, but generally, we would say they're paid at building permit issuance unless there's some other arrangement, which again is provincially mandated.
Mr. Lautenbach to add?
Oh, sorry.
So through the chair, just for clarity on DC deferrals and sort of the previous question, and also when DCs are paid, so through legislation, rental housing actually does already get a deferral of 5 years in terms of where they can pay DCs over 5 installments following occupancy. So it is already built into legislation that there are DC deferrals that are provided for different types of housing. That is actually providing a cash flow challenge for municipalities because it does mean that we're not collecting DCs all up front. That was the framework prior to the legislative change. And so we have estimated that we're losing about $15 million a year in terms of deferrals right now, just based on the current program in terms of funds that we haven't collected yet and the impact on cash flow associated with it. So there are those pieces in legislation that do provide for different timing of when DCs are actually paid, and rental housing being one example where a 5-year deferral is already provided.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, just to be fair to staff, this is, I think, we could spend the entire afternoon going back and forth on this one, so it's a lengthy topic. But just to address, I think this is something more that council will need information on. I think Councillor Schneider has raised an important point, especially us trying to meet our housing start promise and ensuring that we get the funding that is available to us, provided that we get that number of starts. So speaking of DCs, Mr. Heggie, you really specified on the services that are required for creation of new development. I get that. And I get the DC bylaw that development should pay for the services and pay for itself. But when it comes for infill, 40% of our development is infill. Infill is in areas where there is already key services already underground and above ground as well. So could we differentiate between infill and greenfield, where perhaps some of this to stimulate the growth, the housing starts, which we're still grappling with that issue, that we could have a longer deferral period than for greenfield, where the services absolutely are immediately needed?
So through the chair, we already do differentiate by geography. So we have a central neighborhoods and a more greenfield or suburban rate. And so if you are building in the central neighborhood, you pay a lower rate specifically because of that. Generally, the infrastructure is in place. It's the right size. We don't need to charge for additional pipes and those sorts of things. So they get a break kind of on the engineered service side. They do not get a break on the non-engineered service side. And you could argue that that's for good reason, because some of those more intense developments don't have greenfield space on their property, so they're putting more pressure on our parks, and so we need to invest more in our parks. Also, they're going to libraries just like anybody else would, or what have you. So there is a reduction in rate in the central neighborhood specifically for that.
Okay, like I said, there's probably a lot of back and forth that could go on this one. But to
Mr. Rubin, wanted to add?
Yeah, and through the chair, there's also differentiation in the type of dwelling unit that's created as well. And so multi-res is lower, and then there's even a discount if there's 3-bedroom multi-res for DCs versus 2 or 1 bedroom. And so it is tiered to reflect the different nature of the complexity of infill development and the impact on the services that are provided.
So do we align our DCs similar to what the region does as well? Do they differentiate, same as us, between infill and greenfield?
Through the chair, I don't believe they do. I believe there's a single regional rate, as opposed to they don't have a central neighborhood rate for Kitchener that I'm aware of.
Okay, and that's something, have we communicated to the region to have alignment?
We have not.
Okay, well, that's, they have their own bylaws. Okay, again, I think offline that maybe best to have that conversation with the rental rate for rental development. Sorry, the fact that we have a 5-year deferral. Is there still room for us to stimulate that extra growth by providing some more incentives? So I think offline conversation would probably be best.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few of us interested in this now, so just staff can take that away. Obviously, maybe not a budget discussion, but some kind of maybe a strategic session or something on this in the future is something we might want to consider. Up next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. Have we started charging community benefit fees?
We have not.
And is that in the forecast, or?
It is not. It has not come back to council yet for consideration or enforcement.
But does staff have an update on that at all?
So we've done through the chair, we've done work with our consultants and are generally in a place where we believe that we can bring something forward to council in the new year to discuss. And again, it will be council's decision whether it becomes enacted. I said enforced, whether it gets enacted or not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There are no further questions. Please continue.
The next section is reserve funds, and this is generally the final section before we get to the capital forecast itself. Just to talk a little bit about reserve funds, there is kind of savings accounts that we have set up. So we are saving in advance for things. They're similar to if you have an RRSP or a long-term savings account as opposed to your checking account. Generally, our reserve balances are positive. Many of them are below their minimum targets. So I'll talk about our target structure in just a few slides. And over the next few slides, we'll talk about what our reserve structure is. We have a reserve fund policy. Again, council put one in place in 2012. They just updated it last year based on some recommendations that came, or I guess it was this year that came forward to council. And so those are reflected in the information you see here today. There's some key principles in it, including only using the funds for the purpose in which they're set aside for, trying to maintain positive balances and everything, and to remain within our target balances. We have different categories of reserve funds that we'll review over the next few slides. Stabilization, corporate, program-specific, capital, and obligatory. I'll mention what each of those are over the next few slides, but we gather kind of like reserves together and talk about them in that way. So for each of the reserve fund slides, you'll see something like this, which shows red and green lines, which are our target balances. So generally, we would want to be between the red and the greens. The blue bars are the actual aggregate balances for those. And we'd want to see the blue bars land in between the red and green. Stabilization reserves are first, and they relate to our operating performance. So if we have a surplus at the end of the year, we put it into the appropriate stabilization reserve. If we have a deficit at the end of the year, we take the funds out of the appropriate stabilization reserve fund. And I say the appropriate one. We have a tax stabilization reserve, so that's for all the tax-supported services, but each of the enterprises that we talked about last week have their own individual ones, so we're not cross-subsidizing. If we're doing well in one area, we're not cross-subsidizing another area to take care of it. This shows that overall, we're currently within the target range and with relatively stable balances. But you should note that golf and parking themselves, their stabilization reserve balances individually are negative across the forecast. So we should not be looking to increase dividends from golf or from parking to the tax side of things, as they're already in a deficit position. Corporate reserves are next, and those fund corporate-wide issues, things like insurance or sick leave or WSIB. You can see that the blue bars are just below the minimum, the red line, but are planned to grow to be within it, so the forecast for these reserves as a whole is fairly positive. Program-specific reserves are next, and they're named that because they're very narrowly defined as to the different things that they can do. Examples include we have a reserve for elections, for our energy reserve, for affordable housing. EDIF is the major one, EDIF and EDIF 2.0. And those are dependent on, EDIF 2.0 is the major item within this area. It's also dependent on land sales. So the items that you see in here depend on us selling those properties in the timeframes that they're currently forecasted, which means that they could be very different depending on what the actual amounts or the timing of an individual land sale was. Capital reserves are next, and those are used to fund portions of the city's capital program. Just like stabilization reserves, there's individual capital reserves for tax as well as each of the enterprises, and they fund their own portion of the budget. These reserves collectively are staying relatively stable but below the minimum targets. And finally are the obligatory reserves, which are a new category for this year. Council, as I mentioned, updated the reserve policy or approved amendments to it and created an obligatory reserve fund section. And these are different reserves that are required by legislation. It's development charges, the Canada Community Building Fund or Fed Gas Tax Reserve, building, and the recreational land or the Parkland Dedication Reserve. Overall, the balances you see are relatively high, even going beyond the maximum target, but you see some fluctuations there over the 5-year forecast. I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, if there are questions to take about reserves.
A few in the queue. First is Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davy, and thanks, Ryan. For the program-specific reserve, would Economic Development Reserve be in that one?
Yes.
Is that, okay, so that's why there's, okay. And then on the last slide, the
obligatory?
Obligatory. Our reserves really seem very healthy there. I can't recall, what are the conditions there? Can we take some of those funds to put into other reserves, or?
So no, we can't. The positive balances are generally, the building reserve is one that has a healthy balance, and we can't use that for other purposes. But we have not been increasing our building permit rates because we have a strong reserve. Another large balance in there is the recreational land reserve, which we've had a bit of discussion here already today. So there's a decent sized balance there. But again, if a target property were to come up, we'd have the funds that we could actually move on that quickly, as opposed to, having to save up for years and years and years to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Don't blame me for trying, Councillor Ioannidis. Up next is Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair Davy. So if you use any money from the reserves, do you have to pay it back over a certain time frame, or is it just you can just take it and use it?
So through the chair, there's the funds are set aside for the specific purposes. If you're using the funds for that purpose, they don't need to be paid back in that way. So we're funding things from the tax capital reserve that are capital projects that are tax supported. We're not planning to pay those back. Some of the reserves don't have a natural funding source where they're getting money each year, like a stabilization reserve. It's just, did we have a surplus or a deficit at the end of the year? Whatever happens, the funds go in or they come out.
And so I know Councillor Ioannidis asked about the obligatory, but can you move, other than that one, can you move funds around between one reserve to another if you're running low or if you're too high?
So through the chair, our framework says we won't do that sort of stuff, because then we can get into situations where we're kind of buoying up one area at the detriment of somewhere else, and then we're setting aside money for something and then it's not there when we want to do it. So the framework that council has approved is to generally not do that.
Okay, and my last question, are we able to use any of the reserve funds to bring down taxes on a yearly basis, or is that not the intention of these funds?
So through the chair, it's, again, if you build that in, it means that you're going to take money out of that reserve on an ongoing basis, and many of them don't have an ongoing funding source, so that money is going to run out. And so we have stayed away from doing that. There are some other municipalities that have gotten themselves into trouble because they have subsidized their tax rate increase by a reserve, and then the reserve runs out and they have no safety net.
So you're saying if you use it once, you have to use it every year, the same amount, or for 10 years? Okay.
Well, you would, or then you have to get rid of it, and the year you get rid of it, now you have a tax rate spike because you tried to save $1 million last year and now you need to pay the piper next year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. I think the only other thing important to note, though, too, in our tax stabilization reserve, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we've been fortunate that we've been running surpluses, but if we were to run deficits, then that's where that funding would come from, because one time, so that wouldn't go on the taxpayer the following year. Up next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, and maybe you answered this, I just wanted clarification. So then, and I'm sorry to harp on the parkland acquisition aspect, but so that could come out of the obligatory reserves, even though it's not earmarked as that?
It is. So the rec land reserve is one of the obligatory reserve funds. So it's aggregated in that number you see there. And it's specifically set aside for that purpose, for purchasing land. So assuming a piece of land that we're being targeted would fit the criteria of that reserve, we could absolutely move on it.
Right, but you could also move on something else and not parkland acquisition out of those funds, is that correct?
No,
So it would have to be for building a new park,
for acquiring that parkland.
that parkland? Okay.
Yes.
Or
Yeah, so
land
for
to
instance-
build a park, because, sometimes it might be not already an existing park, but land that you're going to turn into a park.
I'd have to look at the terms of it. I think are generally exclusive to acquiring parkland. Like that's the highest priority use of that
Right.
that land. And we could not, for instance, it's an obligatory reserve, and we can't use it for anything else. So
Okay.
if council wanted to, and I'm not saying anybody's suggesting it, but if you wanted to take that and say, let's shave a point or $1 million off the tax rate increase, like you can't.
Right.
It's legislatively not required or not allowed.
And how much is in that reserve, that particular reserve?
I'd have to look. It's more than $10 million right now.
Okay.
I have Mr. Chapman, Mr. Lautenbach. You can, everyone cued in for that one. But, oh, Mr. Chapman, go ahead.
Through Mr. Chair, it might be helpful for council to refer to the appendix because I think it provides further detail than what was on the slides. And so in this case, if you go to Appendix D10, which is the very last page behind tab D, so what you can see there in this case is halfway down the page a heading that says obligatory reserve funds. It then has the breakdown for the 4 funds that comprise that account: development charges, the Canada Community Building Fund, the Building Enterprise and Recreational Land. And the numbers that I would say are most significant are the 2024 projection, the second column, and then the 2025 budget, the third column. And so to Councillor Ioannidis' earlier point, what you can actually see in looking at 2024 is that the obligatory reserve funds are in deficit overall to the tune of $4.8 million. But assuming we issue debt next year, projected to be in a surplus of about $40 million, 17 of which would be for recreational land. Now, what I want to caution council is that that doesn't mean that there are no commitments against that $17 million. The Parks team would have a detailed projection that would show anticipated cash flows. But certainly that is something that if council was serious at looking at that issue through the budget process, we could bring more information back on that today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's no one else in the queue. Can you just remind me in our reserves that have surpluses, we can invest all of those, like they can all be invested and earn a return, but I'm assuming that all of the return would have to stay in the restricted reserve funds, right?
So through the chair, the way we do it is, we take all of our cash balances and invest them, and then we would pay the reserves their portion of our return.
Okay, so building is that, so that maintains the integrity of not being able to transfer funds out. That makes sense. Okay,
Right,
thank you.
so they would have, say, $12 million at the end of the year. They'd be earning interest on that $12 million. We are not keeping that for other purposes.
Okay, so it's not a terrible thing if we have money in our parkland reserve, for example, because we'd be earning more money in interest to acquire more parkland. Councillor Singh?
You asked a question, so it started off another thought. So I understand on the obligatory reserve fund, where legislatively we can't touch those. But outside of that, the other reserve funds that are within the discretion of council and staff, when that's invested, does that go to the tax base, the return, the interest, or does that go to the specific reserve as well?
It goes to each and every individual reserve.
Okay, so that is where we could have the discretion if you wanted to allot the interest earned on those reserves to the tax base as opposed to the return to the reserve. We would have that choice outside of the building or other legislative reserves that we can't touch.
Yeah, so through the chair, I suppose our policy says we won't do that, so it would take a change in policy.
Right. But there's nothing, legislatively, there's nothing that's stopping us.
Correct.
Okay. Just out of interest, again, if this is extensive to get this data, that's fine. What do we get outside of those non-legislative funds as a return on an annual basis?
Through the chair, I don't know the dollar amount. It'd have to add up like all the interest lines on all of the reserves.
Is that challenging to get that data?
No, I don't think it would be that tough.
Can that be provided to council?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston?
Thank you, Chair Davey. And I just wanted to ask as well about some of the things that Councillor Chapman was asking about around parkland reserves and how that money is accessed. And I'm wondering, as we go into a period of time, perhaps, whenever property values, et cetera, might be dropping over the next year, or probably will be and are. And you were saying that the team uses that money whenever they see, a good piece of land to buy, et cetera. How do we maybe set a direction to say that this is a good time to be looking at that and to be using that money maybe over the next year or so?
I think I heard staff say they're coming back with the report, Ms. McGoldrick.
Oh, did I miss?
Yes, through the chair. And so certainly as opportunities present themselves, we would bring them forward to council. And so, for example, there has been some discussion related to the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund and some opportunities associated with parkland there. That would be one of the ways in which we would utilize that funding. And more information is forthcoming to council on that. As Mr. Reedman mentioned, there is an overall parkland acquisition strategy based on the parkland targets the council had set through Spaces back in, I believe it was 2022 or 2023. And so that is on the, as part of the strategic plan implementation, council strategic plan, and council receives updates through the strategic plan on that. But as Mr. Reedman noted, that strategy will be coming back to council to share the overall strategy in 2025.
Thank you, and I apologize for having missed that piece, but I'm wondering because, 2024 earlier, 2025 might be a better time to maybe look at fine-tuning that because of costs going down. So is there an opportunity to be flexible at all with that?
Who would like to take that one? Ms. McGoldrick?
So through the chair, I'll answer on behalf of Mr. Reedman and myself. Certainly, staff will take a look at the best available information to them, and we have a wonderful real estate team that looks at market conditions and makes recommendations associated with that. And so we've identified specific areas of the city where there are parkland deficiencies, and the strategy speaks to taking a proactive stance in terms of monitoring for those properties that may be candidates for future acquisitions.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear, was a proactive stance. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the questions, Mr. Haggie. Please continue.
All right. The final section is just to talk about the capital program as it's laid out in your binder, just a quick orientation of what the different marks or how things are organized in the binder. You'll see the capital program. It's ordered by department, then division. There are some sub-projects, so sometimes there will be what we call a general provision account, so it would just be a general thing like new neighborhood parks or something along those lines, and then there would be some specific parks named underneath it. So the capital forecast identifies those. You'll see some have a little checkbox beside it. Those mean that those are new projects to the capital budget this year, so they were not in last year's capital forecast, just to make it a little simpler for council to see those. And then in the type column, you'll see that toward the left-hand side of the page. Sometimes you'll see a letter of an A, B, or C, or a T, or a TS, and the T means that it's a triple-funded project or a full road reconstruction. If it says TS, it means that it has sidewalk infill, and so those are flagged specifically for council. If it says A, B, or C, that gives you an idea of how good a number we think it is. So as a project gets closer, generally we have more information, and so for a large dollar project, we think it might be like $5 million, but it could be $5 million plus or minus a bit. And so if it's an A, it means we have pretty good information about it. If it's a C, it's like, ooh, it could be very different than that. So we try to improve those every single year, kind of as a project gets closer, get more information and improve the quality of estimate for the project.
Okay. Actually, Mr. Haggie, if you don't mind, I think before we get to the page flip, it's probably a good time to take a 5-minute stretch break, and then we can finish the rest of this up right afterwards. Sure. So see everyone in about 5 minutes, okay? We lied. Okay, very good. All right, Mr. Hagee, page flip.
Yes, so I will progress the slideshow. There's nothing else to present. It's essentially time for to go through the capital forecast. There are a handful, a small number of issue papers, so those are noted on the slides that I will be progressing through as we kind of move from section to section. Major changes are noted on the slides, and so I'll try to keep active with kind of what's being discussed, have those on screen if they're, they may prompt discussion from council. But I'm going to go sit down, and you're going to
I'm going to guide us through. Okay, so committee, at the very beginning of, at least in my package, right after the very first capital is where these pages are starting. So if we see it like page C7, C8, those numbers will be at the beginning on those pages at the bottom that are a little bit of small print. So the first, what I'll do is I'll have each slide up for a few moments, and I'll see if anyone has any questions on it, give them a chance to take a look, and if not, then we'll move on to the following slides. So right now we're on, the one that's on the screen before us.
Question, just a quick one.
Yeah, question, Councillor Singh?
Yeah, just very quickly. On the fire side, for major fleet equipment, you know what, never mind. Yeah, never mind.
Okay. Not seeing any questions on this, so we'll move to the next slide. Councillor Singh, you want to ask how much this would add to the tax levy? Is that the question?
No, I'll focus on the invaluable return and to the community. I think I just want to thank staff, though, for them to have included this in there. I hope some of the impetus was the walkthrough that we had in the neighborhood. Some of it is, of course, I think, potential of some even sponsorship that may add to the futures. But regardless, it's a commitment to show that community that we are recognizing that there's increased usage in that community center. It's a very transient neighborhood, so people are limited with being very vocal because they're only there for a couple of years. But the need is absolutely present. And when staff and I did a walkthrough, and that's credit goes to Mr. Chapman, Mr. May, and Ms. McMulrick, and other members of our operations staff, they realized that the splash pad had just one little thing with water coming out of it. I mean, it was a far cry from a splash pad, and yet the neighborhood still gets so much pleasure out of just that one little item. And the fact that we're putting in the necessary allocation to have an appropriate splash pad, I can tell you this much, that place is going to be booming every day throughout the summer. I can guarantee that.
Okay, now, so Councillor Schneider on this?
Yes, no question. Just kind of just piggybacking on what Councillor Singh has said. These are incredible investments. Our community centers are very much like our libraries. They're a great equalizer where everybody can come and connect. Services are provided there. There's place times to grow and celebrate and just connect with fellow neighbors. And things like Communities in Bloom, Kitchener in Bloom, the joy that a resident gets from receiving a recognition for their garden, it's invaluable. The pride they take in their city, their property, their neighborhood, the fact that they want to show some joy in their neighborhood with their beautiful garden, and that we're recognizing that. These are all great investments for the outdoor rinks, free outdoor fresh air, family fun activities. So great investments, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And I echo Councillor Schneider's sentiments about our community centers. Not only are they the great equalizer, I would say, but they're the great differentiator in our community. We have invested in community centers for many, many, many years. We have 11 in our community. It's pretty amazing. And just the joy and the relationships and community enhancement that comes out of our community centers, I think it is incredibly well-spent money, And I'm always so proud to see what our staff are doing there and what our residents get from them as well. So 100% agree with you. Thank you.
So I've got good news. I think I'm going to add 4 more community centers without adding to the budget. I don't know. We have, yeah, a couple more. Mayor Urbanovich?
Well, no, and thank you to both councillors who spoke to this, because I think it is one of those things that really makes us stick out. And, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our predecessors that sat around a previous horseshoe many, many decades ago, who made a decision to keep our gas utility, because our gas utility is one of the tools, along with good fiscal management, that has enabled us to actually have these kinds of amenities, along with others in our community that we don't necessarily see in neighboring communities. And I think that has really helped us deliver a quality of life to our residents that I think is outstanding. And so, I think that was just worth acknowledging.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because I've heard throughout the community recently, and I guess as a way to detract from what I would say is good discipline by council and staff in terms of our budgeting, was that we have the gas utility. And I think that's a bit of a cherry-picking argument when you could just say, for example, we have all of these community centers that are funding just that. So anyway, I'll move along. Councillor Hernandez?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davey. Are we going to be going through these pages as well?
Whatever, it goes in order. So if something is not listed here, but is on that C number page, then yeah, you would raise it at that time. That's a good question.
Okay. I would like to go to page 10 anyways.
Page C10?
Page C10, yeah, appendix C10.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
And it's regarding the Forest Heights Community Center addition. Just I see that we're finally getting some money going in there for next year. I just want to know, I've been getting quite a bit of feedback from the community saying, why is it taking so long? So I just would like to, give them some feedback based on that. I see the next 4 years, there's some significant investment going in.
Mr. May.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, the funding in the first 2 years will be used for community engagement and a business case study to look at what are the specific needs for the expansion. And then you can see that the bulk of the funding in 2027 and 2028 is when construction would happen.
Okay, so 2027, we expect construction to begin.
Yeah, I suspect that in 2026, council will see a business case, council will direct us to engage an architect, and then in 2027, the work would begin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Deneau?
Thank you, Chair Davey. So on C11, the outdoor winter rinks, we know climate change is affecting our seasons, especially in the winter time. And so I'm just curious, how many, is there an average amount of days that the communities are able to use our outdoor rinks?
Mr. May.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, it's an interesting question. So the funding that you see in 2025 to 2027 was the result of direction council gave staff in 2023. So that's basically just implementing what council has provided. It is a question that staff are actively considering. And so what we're meeting on in the next couple of months is where will these specific priority rinks be built? And at what point do we stop building more rinks and look at investing these dollars in different ways? So I suspect that will be a topic of future discussion with council.
Thanks, Michael. And so how many outdoor rinks do we normally operate? I got you.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we operate about 40 a year.
Okay. I can continue?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So on C17, it's the corporate communications, and it talks about website and intranet. Where would, I'm not sure who can answer this.
Oh, sorry, we're not there just yet.
We're not there yet?
That's the next
All
slide.
right, I'll cue back in.
Oh, pardon me, am I? Yeah, so were there any other questions on up to C, I guess, 16? And I have Councillor Singh in the queue.
No, that was just a clarification. If we're going to just go for certain numbers, then we can just ask questions
Yeah,
that may
so-
not be in the issue paper.
So generally you want to follow the slide.
Yeah.
And if we get to the page number that the slide isn't reflected, you have a question on it, then that's when you would ask it.
Perfect. So we're at C16 for now.
We're up to, well, basically we're up to C10 technically, but.
Yeah, I'll wait.
Okay. Any other questions on C10, Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Chair Davey. Mine is actually on page C11, just expanding on Councillor Deneau's question on the outdoor winter rinks. I'm wondering if we have or are considering using more of a bladder system for our outdoor rinks, because with the melting, the water could stay in the bladder and refreeze and hopefully get us a little more use out of our outdoor rinks.
Mr. May?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the use of different technologies is definitely something staff is considering. There are the artificial rinks. We have 2 of those now in the community that move around. There's also the question of an ice track versus an ice rink. There's, should we put cooling systems in a couple of major rinks? So the future of our outdoor rinks is a hot topic. Well, hot, maybe not hot, but, and it's one that council will be engaged in the future.
Great, thanks for that.
And Councillor Singh on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it doesn't necessarily need to be additional capital costs. I think Mr. May will kind of confirm this in many cases, that we can just multi-purpose utilize our community gardens where the water infrastructure is already there. There may be some costs related to managing the rink, but primarily it's seeked out through volunteerism. So there's not an overall significant cost. If the weather allows it, fantastic. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But the very fact that you have a community garden and you have water infrastructure brought in, the general infrastructure is already there to have the winter rink as well. So perhaps that's what the format that we need to take a look at is prioritize on the gardens. And if that also allows to have the ice rink, that's just icing on top.
So through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, I can confirm that there is very little operating cost. This is done by an army of volunteers across the community, and that the bulk of the capital cost is normally related to the installation of water. And so we do prioritize those areas that have a community garden for the exact reason Councillor Singh's noted.
Excellent. There's no one else in the queue, so we'll go to the next slide. We'll now take questions up to page C22. Councillor Singh.
So this is on C18. More of just a confirmation on ongoing work that's happening with equity, diversity, inclusion, strategy plan review. It shows that one-time allotment in 2025. Is there anything specific that's going to be done with that?
Ms. Robb?
Thank you for the question. Through you, through you, Chair Davey. Yes, we actually are working with the equity team to go out for a tender to a consultant to help us put together our strategic equity plan for the city. We've been working with the equity team thus far on developing a framework that will help guide that work. So we do expect that work to take place beginning in 2025.
So what's been done so far? I mean, this is something that obviously the conversation has revolved around for a number of years now. Is there anything more like substantive that we can like point to address the the investments that have been made, and so that we can take some acknowledgement of it as well?
Through the chair, I would say largely our greatest success with the team so far has been in delivering and implementing the Equity Rise Grant, which, as you may recall, Council invested additional monies in last year to bring us through to increase the total of money that is distributed through that grant program. I don't have the numbers specifically in front of me, but I can send a summary to Council over the number of entities that have been supported through the RISE Fund. We have had staff turnover in that team, which has contributed to a lack of progress on the strategic plan, but we have delivered training internally. We have worked with our other colleagues across the organization on reconciliation projects in the organization. So work is happening. It hasn't been largely visible, but we do intend to have more information in front of Council in 2025.
Okay, that would be helpful. I look forward to having the information for us to take stock. On the RISE Fund, though, are we getting the full allotment of, is it being given out, or are we seeing any challenges to get people come forward? What's been the success of it? I'm very proud of the RISE
Yeah.
Fund, by the way, yeah.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you for the question. It has been largely successful, and I would say we are oversubscribed to the number of applications that we get compared to the amount of money that we have available to give out. So we are planning in 2025 to do a review of the 4-year pilot that has been underway to be able to report back to council on the permanent path forward for that grant. So of the $150,000 that's available, we typically get anywhere between $200,000 and $400,000 worth of requests.
Okay, and again, that's an important question in my mind, because we have the additional $1 million allotment that we could possibly dedicate to certain things, and if the interest oversubscribes what's there right now, that's perhaps something that we can address to take a look at as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, just to, further Councillor Singh's questioning, do we get like an update, or is that from economic development, on the funding that we get, and then see where that has been leveraged and what opportunities those grants created for the city?
Sorry, Ms. Rao, go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, with specifically for the RISE grant, our interim director of equity, Ria, does send out a summary after every cycle to let council know who the successful applicants were for the grant in that intake period, and it's also posted to our website.
Okay, but do we get any specific to say, whatever the amount of funding, do we get an update like a year later or 2 years later saying, such and such X company was able to grow their business to this based on this funding?
So through the chair, the RISE grant isn't necessarily an economic development grant. It's wide-ranging and varied in terms of the impact that it has. So some of the grants have funded education classes for young people. Some of them have supported the development of tools and programs for other small not-for-profits. So they're not specifically delivering an economic impact.
Even if it's not an economic impact, I still would like to know and say, such and such was able to educate 50 students or 100 students, whatever it is, tailored to a specific situation. I think it's important that we're able to communicate that to the community, how this funding is going and where and what the purpose of this funding is in the amount of leveraging in the community, because I think it's significant.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the feedback.
Okay.
And sorry, there's no one else in the queue. Sorry, Ms. Rao, if you could just confirm too, I don't, just in terms of adding to the RISE fund, I recall Mayor Urbanovich added some funds to the grant last year. Do you recall if that was a one-time funding addition or if there is additional? Go ahead.
Through the chair, it was a one-time funding, recognizing that it is a pilot program and that staff do intend on coming back to report to council on the program over the course of its 4 years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Oladuni.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to Appendix C14. We're looking at arena strategy, then arena's general renovation. I just want to get a better understanding around what we, number one, mean by arena strategy, but then general renovation, I'm guessing this is for the odd, if I'm correct. You can correct me on that. And just throwing out a random question, when are we looking at a major upgrade from the odd? Is that something, when I'm looking over the next 10 years, it looks like the numbers are pretty much the same. So I'm guessing this is just renovation and not necessarily an upgrade. Just would love to get some thoughts on that.
Mr. May.
So through you, Mr. Chair, those are some big questions there. I'm going to take them one at a time, and if I miss something, you can remind me. The arena strategy is a strategy to look at how we are currently allocating and booking ice time to see where we may be able to make changes in process, minor renovations, changes in how we fund our grant groups in order to create more space available for the community. And so that work will be undertaken next year. The arena's general provision isn't about the odd, it's about all of our other community rinks. And so that is the general provisions required to maintain and operate those facilities on an ongoing basis. In terms of the future of the ODD, I suspect a report will be coming back to council in the first half of next year that will lay out the beginning of a work plan. I can't specifically tell you when we will bring a decision to council in terms of the future of the ODD. What I can tell you is the ODD is a very sound and well-loved facility, and there is no urgent facility reason why we need to get out of the ODD quickly. So I think it's appropriate for council, given the size of this decision, to take our time, take a methodical approach, take a data-based approach, and that's what staff will be bringing forward next year.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have a question. Just wanted to make a quick comment on, I did notice there's, and it's not for this year, but for 2026, the website refresh. I think that's a good idea to bring that forward, because I think we're going to see some significant changes in how we can address the needs of our users and their ability to find information through the advancements in technology, artificial and otherwise. Councillor Singh, question? Go ahead.
Yeah, kind of came to me afterwards as you were speaking about the website. I just trying to touch base with, I think, members of the committee, council, staff. This is an upcoming motion that I will be bringing forward, addressing AI technology, of how we can enhance our communication and, at the very least, the website, amongst other things, of efficiency. With the upgrade, so have staff already started looking at that? Like, what type of incorporation will AI play in part, or it's still very early days?
Ms. Robb?
Through the chair, it's very early days. We last did our total overhaul of the website in 2020, and so that's why it's budgeted for 2026. So we have not started scoping out a project plan. There'll be ample opportunity to get your feedback. Councillor Singh, it's a great suggestion.
Okay, of course, and hopefully the motion will direct more to that. But I will say as a comment, a lot of the AI tools can be adopted into existing websites. It's not a general overhaul that's necessarily required. But that's something of a learning process I think we will have to incorporate. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston?
Thank you, Chair Davey. And my comments as well are on the upcoming work on the website. Something that I've heard from community members is a challenge when they're signing up for programming, especially if they have multiple kids to sign up or things to sign up for all at the same time. So I'm wondering if we'll be also asking the community members what they're looking for when we're looking to update the website, and maybe even going out to either community centers or neighborhood associations to even run pilots. Is that something that we're considering?
Mr. Mays can take this one.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to remind council that going back a couple of years now, you approved and provided staff direction on a number of improvements to the operations of our community centers. One of those items, by the way, 11 of 15 of those recommendations are complete, but one of the uncompleted items was a review of our program registration. And it's a little bit about the website, but it's more about our ActiveNest system. And so that work will begin next year. And yes, we will absolutely be engaging neighborhood associations and members of the community in that work.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you for that update. Next up is Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And this is with regards to the RepNet. I know in the past it was a good opportunity for us to continue with this program. I'm just wondering if we could get like an offline update on where this is going, and because I see it's a 10-year forecast that we're still looking at, and I just want to make sure we're going down the right path with this.
Ms. Robb?
Through the chair, I think the suggestion to do that offline is a great one. It'll give me a chance to connect with our director of IT. So thank you for that. We'll follow up on.
Thank you. That's all the questions. So we'll move on to the next part here. So we're taking questions up to page C38. Up to page C38. Councillor Singh.
So on C38, the resurfacing of city streets. Just was a drastic difference between what's allotted for 2025 and 2026. I just wanted clarification from staff on that.
Mr. Reedman.
So in case anyone else isn't on it, it's 300,000 approximate, 372 for 2025, but it'll be 3 million, over 3 million 2026 and there beyond.
Through the chair, I'll direct your attention to Appendix G15. There's an issue paper about the reconstruction of a retaining wall, and the funding is proposed to be redirected to support that reconstruction. That's $2.7 million, which is being reallocated given that the pavement quality index is higher than the minimum benchmark standard.
So it is higher, but so in 2025, so we wouldn't be addressing immediate potholes, or we're just going to have to try to make do
Through the mayor,
2025?
this isn't the pothole restoration, this is resurfacing, and so this is the
resurfacing, okay.
resurfacing program that the engineering team leads.
Okay, so resurfacing, just so I understand, so I'm sorry, resurfacing, I thought pothole repair. Resurfacing is when you go with a second coat, or is it the full reconstruct?
Through the chair, it's actually neither of those. It's a shave and repaving the street, and so it's like a sort of block by block basis of a resurfacing of the whole entire street in between construction cycles. So typically a road is reconstructed fully in about a 75, 80-year period, and every 25 years we look at trying to resurface the top coat of asphalt.
So for the interest of transparency, could we get the streets that were supposed to have been allotted this year that would be deferred out?
Through the chair, and so I could look to report back on that. I do know that we plan this given we have a long list of tender, and then we look to plan it on what we can actually fund based on the amount that comes in. And so it does vary from year to year. We look at the streets with our poorest quality pavement index for the entire street, but we can look at reporting back on that.
Okay, you know what, I think staff are probably making an appropriate judgment call. I have placed trust in you, so I'm okay with it. I don't need it in case any other member of council requires it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair Davey. C25, downtown improvements and downtown incentive funding. So I'm just curious what downtown incentives funding is.
Mr. Reedman.
Through the chair, so downtown incentives are things like facade grants that business owners apply for, and then we work with them to, change the front windows, increase the look and feel of different businesses.
Okay, so so for a project like that, do you go through the business owner or the owner of the building?
Through the chair, I believe that both are involved. I would have to look into that to report back to you, but
okay,
that is something we can get back to you on.
And then, so if you may not know this, Mr. Reedman, but if the business owner wants to do it and the owner of the building doesn't want to do it, does the owner of the building take precedent over a business owner?
So I don't have those details on my fingertips, so that is something we'll have to get back to you on.
Okay. And then also, I guess I'm just curious, how well this program is utilized, because there are, quite a few buildings downtown that are, looking a little old, and so I'd like to know, how well the program is utilized. And also, downtown improvements, is that like landscaping? I'm just curious what that.
So I do have a response for the other part. Both the building owner and the tenant are both responsible to sign off on that facade improvement. And the building owner does trump the business owner in the situation. The downtown improvement is things like banners, bench replacement, things like that are covered through that. I believe horticulture is covered through infrastructure services.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess, if I could get some information of how well that program is actually used and who's used it and what they've used it for, that'd be great.
Yes, certainly we can report back. I do know that it does come in waves. It depends on if new tenants take over businesses and they look to improve their facade. But we can get more details and send that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There are no further questions in this section, so we'll now take questions up to page 33. Which is mostly just road reconstruction projects. Up to page C33. Oh, sorry, yes, sorry, page C41, sorry, I'm looking at the green section, not the top. Thank you. C41, Councillor Deneau.
I can talk about C41?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So C41, the active transportation infrastructure, is that related to bike lanes? Yeah.
Mr. Reedman.
Through the chair, yes, this is on-road cycling facilities, not the trails, which are funded through infrastructure services.
Okay, so I guess, with the recent legislation change by the provincial government, is that too high of an allotment? Just because it seems like we're going to have to navigate some waters if we want to add bike lanes.
Through the chair, our Cycling Trails Master Plan identified a need for a significant amount of funding, and this funding barely covers the investments over time. The changes from the province that are proposed are related to when a traffic lane is being removed. Some of our on-road infrastructure is in the right-of-way, but not removing traffic lanes as well, and so that would be fully under the purview of this council. So multi-use trails within a road right-of-way are part of this active transportation funding. We do know that there are roads that are built at overcapacity, and so we have a few short segments of 4-lane roads that we don't think would be a challenge from the provincial government in terms of implementing this. And we do have plans for our cycling infrastructure connecting out to Conestoga College and integrating in with the LRT, and so there's some gaps in our network there for all ages and abilities infrastructure that we're looking at building out over the next few years.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reben. And the small-scale traffic calming, what is that? I know what large-scale traffic calming is, I believe I do. I'm just curious what the small scale is.
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, so these are the seasonal measures that are put in the spring and removed in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are still 3 people in the queue. I just thought I'd point out while I'm at it, going to page 41 also takes us to the next slide, if anyone's interested in those questions as well. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, my question wasn't similar to the small-scale traffic calming. If the committee will recall, I think it was last year or the year before that, we were able to add 100,000 addition to the traffic calming. When we did that, that was, a lot of the impetus was not fully being aware of what hotspot speed calming, it was still a new thing. It was anecdotal of the experiences that we received with the plexi poles in the median, the street narrowing with 3 plexi poles, and seeing the immediate change in traffic patterns or traffic behavior using those light speeding measures. But looking at the budget now, I'm seeing that much of that allotment that we did, that 100,000 extra, has been more so dedicated towards the hotspot, but I think we're not necessarily putting that extra resource towards the small scale. So question to staff would be, is there a way for us to reorient some of that from the overall speed calming so that we can have more availability of those plexi poles? How many are available to each ward? And I guess it would be either an issue paper or a suggestion later as part of budget day if you want to look at increasing that budget. That would be. So there's a question in there somewhere. Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, and so we could certainly report back and provide an overall update on the program. What I can say is that the seasonal traffic calming operates at about a $10,000 a year deficit based on the staff time to install and remove those programs. So we're actually diverting money on an annual basis from our formal traffic calming program to cover that small deficit. And so just food for thought, but we can report back on the overall number and how that $100,000 investment was made.
Yeah, no, that would be helpful, just to see what added improvement to speed calming that extra 100,000 did. And more importantly, as I said, I think it's a question that we have to have amongst ourselves. What are we deriving from that small scale speed calming measures, and do we need more resource available? I can say from my perspective, it would definitely help a lot. The median deflectors help, but again, it's the 3 that give the biggest bang for the buck, and when we only have certain amount allotted, there's still a lot of streets that need that extra service, so leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davey. And yeah, just to touch upon what Councillor's saying, I recall in the past, if certain members don't use their fully allocation, can we not put those back in the pools for others to use? Because I feel like if someone's not using the full allocation, then anyway, someone else would probably take it. Just a thought. Anyways, my questioning is with regards to the way how, and this is no criticism or anything like this, just on like pages of, let's say, C29 to C34, for example, can we not put in a line in there in one of the columns to say which ward it's in, even in say which multiple, if it's in multiple wards? Let's just be helpful. Anyways, that's just a suggestion.
I don't see any staff queuing in for that, but I think they'll take that as a suggestion for future budget papers, and it doesn't seem terribly difficult, but leave it to them to come back. Up next is Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. I want to thank Councillor Singh for all his comments. I just agree with them 100%. I do have a question for Mr. Redmond, just some clarification. So for the small scale traffic calming, you had mentioned if we took some dollars from the other traffic calming to the small scale traffic calming, you said there's staff issues. There's not enough staff to install things. Is that the gist of it?
Mr. Friedman?
Yeah, through the chair. So I have a few more details. So the 100,000 gave us more flexible signs and one permanent sign in each ward. We are currently installing 3 narrowed areas per ward, and they are all being fully utilized. In addition to, I think there's 10 other flex stake locations in each ward. But it is related to the staff time of installing and removing every year. And so the permanent installations in the Vision Zero program are the best option for the long-term viability of safer traffic areas in each ward. The seasonal is meant to be a stopgap until we can get that full installation of Vision Zero across our city.
And what is that timeline that you would see to have the full installation across our city?
Through the chair, and so there is a Vision Zero report that's coming in Q1, so we provide annual updates to council on our areas of most need. We will also be looking at that. We currently offer one formal traffic calming program as part of the program, and we hear from council that they like the more agile, data-driven component, which would allow us to install more permanent locations more quickly across the city. But I'd have to go back and look at the long-term installation of Vision Zero, and so it was like a decade-long program at least, and through our road reconstruction projects as well. We also implement complete streets, and so safer streets for all road users.
Yeah, I think we've done, a really great job on the traffic calming, the permanent ones that we have installed, and the temporary ones. But I also feel that the city's outpacing the speed that we can get these installations in, and I'm wondering if we could come up with a way to maybe speed this up, put more money in this piece of the budget. I ask it every year, and I'll ask it again if we could increase this budget, just to start to keep up to the pace of the traffic that we're having in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Take that as a comment. Up next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask a question about C40 and the Heritage Property Grant Program. So I notice in the notes you say that 588,000 were added over a 10-year forecast. I just wondered what the uptake on the program has been, because I believe we incremented the grant last year, did we not, or the year before?
Mr. Friedman, go ahead.
Through the chair, and so this grant program was actually implemented first in 2002 and then updated in 2005. And so it hasn't actually been increased or changed since that point of time. And so council may recall that with Bill 23 and other provincial legislation that we are required to conduct heritage assessments on any projects that are listed within the city within about a 2-year time frame. And so we know that the number of designations are increasing, but also that the cost of the program has increased over time. And so the goal of the update here would be to allow for 12 maximum $5,000 grants per property per year, plus two $15,000 special project grants for projects that are properties that have multiple heritage attributes that are being worked on at the same time.
So did we not have a similar program in the past, prior to 2022?
Sorry, I said 2002 and then updated in
2002.
2005. So that was the last change. And so we are recommending, given that the last change was 2005 and the change in scope based on provincial legislation, that we are recommending this issue paper.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, thank you. And this is also for the page 40. I'm just wondering, and this is just for offline, if we can get some more information on the use of our brownfield program, see who's been using it in the last few years, if it has been being activated or used, and also with regard to the Heritage Property Grant Program, I would love to know, who's using that and if that is being used or not.
Mr. Chapman?
Through the chair, we can report back with specific detail. What I can advise is that the cash flow for the Brownfield TIG program typically aligns to approved applications. So as you approve an application, it's paid off typically over up to 10 years. And so the amounts you see here are generally tied to approved applications. We can come back with that list for council.
Mr. Riebendad?
Through the chair, just in terms of the heritage grants, so since 2014, we've had an average of 17 grant applications made every year and an average of 12 grants being awarded. So that program is fully subscribed on an annual basis.
Okay. There's no one else in the queue. Let's take the next two slides together. So questions up to page 46. Up to page 46, yeah. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, just a question about the library expenses here. Is it the city that would, I'm just surprised that it appears on our budget and not on the library budget, I guess, is my question.
Mr. Haggie? 1 second here.
Here we go, sorry. Through the chair, we fund the library. It's in a general expense account there, so we are the funder for their capital program. Just like when they're opening up a new branch, we have the funding in ours for a DC, or funded by development charges. So we are showing it there, but it's in general expenses, not under a specific department.
But this is technology upgrades, right?
We fund all of their capital programs.
Okay. So the operating for the library is done through their own budget? Is that how that works?
No, we also transfer them a grant,
Oh, it's all-
an
it's all
operating
through our
grant.
money. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Ioannidis?
We're up to page 46?
Up to page 46, yeah.
Okay. I just want to get a bit of clarification in 2025 what the $1 million is for the Bram yards and the strategic addition.
It's the environmental assessment, Mr. Riebman?
Through the chair, and so that was a direction from council as part of the Bram yards through the Building Faster Fund to get the Bram yards remediated and prepared for future redevelopment.
Okay, is that also with the strategic addition?
That's the $1 million we've been meeting on.
Oh, okay.
No, that's okay. Not seeing anyone else in the queue. Let's, next page, we'll go up to page 64. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair Davey. On page 53, I know staff's going to bring back a report on the invasive species management plan. but there's no funding earmarked after that. And I think it's quite evident in some of our areas that, we do have to come up with a plan to deal with some of the invasive species. And so would that be added to the budget line next year, if that is determined to be something that has to be done?
So through the chair, you're correct that the management plan implementation funding has not been identified in the capital budget. That's because it will be defined through the management plan. Our first course of action is to look at what are we currently doing, and is that funding being best utilized towards the highest need? And so we'll be looking at current allocations and then looking to see whether additional allocations are required to support the plan.
Okay, thank you. On C56, excuse me, neighborhood park rehab. So again, there's funding in 2025, nothing in 26, and then so on and so forth. There is until 2034. And so I'm just curious for next year why there's a gap or there's nothing included in that.
So through the chair, these are allocations specific to neighborhood parks associated with sports fields, so different amenities associated with the sports fields within a park setting. Neighborhood parks are better defined under page C57 and 58, which provides a more comprehensive allocation in terms of the park's general provision and the specific parks. So that's the neighborhood park rehab is a very small component of the overall park investments.
Okay, thank you. C57, the new neighborhood parks. I know we've talked about building new parks, and I know Places and Spaces is coming out next year. Will that information be identified at that point in time as to where we think some new neighborhood parks would be located?
So through the chair, the new neighborhood parks are the developer build parks. So we do have monies allocated in 2025 to 8 parks that have been identified that the developer will be advancing through the subdivision build, developer build process.
Okay, thank you. And my last one is C58, the Rockway Gardens annual repairs. We receive emails almost weekly regarding some concerns in around the Rockway Gardens area due to the shelter across the street. So I'm just curious, is $11 million enough? I'm not sure how much damage is done. I just want to make sure that, there's enough money there to make sure it is rehabilitated and, brought up to what it should be.
So through the chair, there has been some recent investments in Rockway Gardens for some of their structures and the irrigation system. The amount identified is generally to do the regular maintenance activities, but there was an infusion of funding in more recent years to address some of the larger capital items. Staff have a good working relationship with the KW Horticultural Society and work with them in terms of defining needs. And so as new needs come, come forward, staff will be assessing that in partnership to look to see where additional investment may be required.
Perfect, thank you. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we continue, I just wanted to point out the website that was noted earlier. It does have a whole bunch of useful information with respect to budget, but I'm not sure. I know Mr. Lautenbach mentioned it's .com and not .ca, but I think I was having some difficulty here, but the words Open Book and Questica are flipped as well. So it's kitchener.openbook.questica.com if folks want to refer to that as well. Okay. Next in the queue is Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I'll start off with page 51. It's really more of a comment, bringing light to business strategy and KU rental programs. And Ms. McGoldrick, I think you and I have had some, very brief conversation and looking forward to getting this work started or getting some sense of that strategy to come forward. So again, this is not a criticism, it's just more so a reflection. I wish we are speeding up the process a little bit, because again, we are losing out on opportunity, especially with conversions with heat pumps, as other industries are looking at entering into that market. So it will eat up into some potential profits, as well as the fact that we are allocating 150 across 4 years towards a strategy. I hope it's a banger, because we're spending a lot of money for it. But I think there's a lot of potential, so I just wanted some comment on that. Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. McGolder, go ahead.
Sure, through the chair. This is work that is actively underway through the Kitchener Utilities Clean Energy Transition Strategy. Council may recall that we took phase 1 of that body of work forward around this time last year, and phase 2 is really looking at those business opportunities, assessing the business viability, and we will be reporting back to council in terms of those opportunities. There was 11 buckets of business opportunities that we brought forward to council in April, one of them being related to our rental program and enhancing the rental program. So certainly that is work underway.
Okay. The other is for tree planting. From the Emerald Ash Borer, have all the trees been replaced by now? Because it's been some years, so, or still some that are stumped but never replanted.
Yeah, through the chair, I can get back to you on that, Councillor Singh. I do know that we have an aggressive planting program, and I do believe we addressed the backlog. There are additional planting needs and tree removals that we continue to plant, and then to meet our sustainable urban forest strategy. My recollection, but I will verify, is that the street trees have been replanted. It's the park trees that were removed that we're still in the process of replanting.
Okay, all right, just a confirmation on that would be helpful. And the last bit is on C57, more specific to my ward, that I represent for Country Hills Park. It's an allotment of $150,000. Is that just some ongoing remediation work, or will this be the onset of the park's reconstruction? Because the park is quite outdated, and early on, I think the DMF funding, we thought the work was going to get started a little sooner. Now it's outlined for 2026. Is much of the park rehabilitation tied to the DMF work as well?
So through the chair, you're referring to Countryside Park?
Country Hills Park on C57.
Okay, my understanding is Country Hills Park is a park rehabilitation. The DMAF associated project is Countryside in 2026.
There's some work that's going to happen in 2026 as well. Oh, I mean, sorry, for Countryside Park
Okay,
as
so,
well.
excuse me, I'm just going to pull up the project sheet on that. That is related to trail improvements for Country Hills. It's not completely tied to the DMAF, but it is to be done after the DMAF. So it's not concurrently with the DMAF, but it is an opportunity to enhance the trails following the DMAF project.
With the 150 that's allotted?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. 4 people in the queue. Next is Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. I'm on page C57 also. A couple of questions. One, I think I know the answer to this, but the Dune Old Mill ruins, you've got allocated $250,000 for 2025 and then nothing for the coming years. Is this because we don't know how much it's going to cost to restore this, or?
So through the chair, the funding is allocated to the structural repairs associated with the site and engagement associated with placemaking. Once we understand the placemaking opportunities, we'll look to see if the $150,000 is sufficient or if additional monies need to be allocated. That may not mean additional requests, it may just mean prioritization out of the park's general provision.
So this $250,000 isn't for the ruin, the actual ruin area, the one that's all fenced off right now?
The 250,000 is for the structural repairs of the ruin
Okay.
in the area that's fenced off, correct?
And that will be done in 2025?
That's correct,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, that's good. Next question, Upper Canada Park, 1.8 million. What is that for?
So the Upper Canada Park is related to upgrades to promote enhanced accessibility within the sports fields, as well as some site-specific improvements, parking lot, washroom structures, really to make that, because that is a destination, a premier destination sport park, to really complete the park as a destination sport park.
That's really good to hear. There's a lot of out-of-town teams that come there, so I'm happy for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. So my first question had to do with the Victoria Park Master Plan implementation, and I noticed there's no money allocated for 2025. I just wondered if you could tell us what the plan is. Oh, sorry, C53.
53. Ms. McGoldrick.
So through the chair, the Victoria Park Master Plan, the funding for the development of the master plan was allocated through previous budgets, so that is existing capital balances that are being used to complete the master plan, and then, which is anticipated to be completed by the end of 2025. And then what you see in terms of the 2026, 2027, and 2028 funding allocation is for implementation of the master plan recommendations.
Okay, thank you. My other question had to do with, on page C62, the Cherry Park Stormwater Management Enhancement Program, and I see there's nothing, is that the program to start in 2028? Is that the idea?
Through the chair, yes, the Cherry Park Stormwater Management Pond enhancements are scheduled for 2028 in accordance with the DMAF project schedule.
Okay, and does that mean there's still room to look at what the plan actually is with the neighborhood, or is it pretty well finished?
Yes, absolutely. I believe there is an extensive engagement process through that to bring it through to construction.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, and it's probably in the operating budget. Can I ask it? Or you want me to come back?
If staff, or yeah, go ahead.
It's about the Tier 1 and Tier 2 grants, and I just don't know where to find it, and I'd like to sort of see a history of where it's come from, where it is, and what's being proposed. But if you just direct me to the pages, I'll have a look.
Mr. May?
Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps my colleagues in finance can help on a page number. I don't know the page number. What I would tell you is we are, I would say, days away from launching a comprehensive review of Tier 1 and Tier 2, as well as in-kind facility grants. And I suspect that later next year, Council will receive significant recommendations to change the program.
So does that mean it's not in the budget, or it is?
It is. I'm not aware what page it's on.
Okay.
Mr. Hagee?
Sure. So through the chair, it's the details of it will be in the budget resolution. So we have the information from last year as part of the 2024 budget resolution. Council will shortly be getting the 2025 budget resolution that has the whole amount and all of the groups that will be getting the funding.
Okay, so there's no need for an issue paper along those lines.
No, you'll be getting it
okay.
next week, or either later this week or next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stretch.
Yeah, I have a question. Appendix C48, it's the security vests for our FM security. I see 2029 budgeted. So I guess I'm just looking for clarity. Is that something they've already requested and we've put it in for 2029? And then like it just really sticks out to me that there's no other plan for updating equipment or safety measures.
Ms. Wilder?
Yeah, so through the chair, the puncture-proof security vests are, they expire after a certain number of years and require replacement. And so that's what you see in the capital plan. And so, yes, then we equip our staff accordingly.
That makes much more sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to stay keyed in, Ms. McGoldick, my question is for you. It's with respect to, well, it's referenced on page 57. I'm not sure if it's the appropriate place, but there are incomplete sections of the Walter Bean Trail in terms of ownership. Do we have funds allocated for that eventual acquisition, and where would I see that?
So through the chair, back to you, Councillor Davey. We do have funds allocated for a Walter Bean Trail assessment to look at the lands that are required to be acquired, as well as the lands that are located in flood damage areas where we see extensive damage, and to look to see what the best alternative for the trail is. Those monies were allocated as part of the 2024 budget, and that work is ongoing. We do not have monies allocated for land acquisition associated with that. That would come forward following the outcomes of the study.
And again, if you don't know this offhand, that's fine, but are there many like little pieces that are missing left in our acquisition trails? Is this going to be like a bigger issue going forward, or do we only have like a handful of them?
So to my knowledge, the Walter Bean Trail is located primarily on public lands, although they're not always city-owned public lands. And so the Grand River Conservation Authority, much of the trail is located on GRCA lands. We do have a portion of the trail located on private lands, but which provide public access. I think the most problematic areas, and certainly the one area that we know in your ward, is where we don't have public access agreements on private lands to be able to access and ensure trail access. And so, when we're looking at the study, those would be the highest priority lands to either develop agreements or look at acquisition. But then we would look at lands that are not in public ownership and make sure that we have agreements that are, or easements that provide for continuous use, so that that access isn't tenuous over the long term.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I want to make sure that the broken linkages were indeed the highest priority, because I've obviously heard some issues from residents that travel along a trail to a dead end, and they can see the trail where they want to be, but they're not allowed to cross it. So I'm glad it's on the priority list. Councillor Chapman.
Yes, sorry. I just had another question about, and I don't have a page, so staff will have to help me out on this one. It's being brought to my attention, the fact that, well, as we know, we take the garbage pails away, a lot of them away in the winter. And as the different areas of the city intensify, this is becoming a bit of a problem, both in the lack of garbage pails and the emptying of the garbage pails. So I don't know if that's part of what budget line or not, or something that's being considered.
Ms. McGolder?
So through the chair, Council, you may recall that Council had approved additional funding in 2023 for year-round sanitation cans throughout the city. And so that it was to match the winter service level with the summer service level. We implemented that, actually as part of the 2023 for the 2024 winter period. So last winter was the first year we implemented the program. And so we have a consistent number of sanitation can service levels for both, summer period and winter period. The difference being that in the summer, the can placement may be more internal to park spaces, whereas in the winter, we need to pull them out to be able to be accessed to be maintained. And so that would be the only difference, but we still provide sanitation cans for each park space where we would normally provide in the summer. They just may be pulled to the edge of the park to be able to be maintained.
So we have the same number of containers? It's just in different locations?
That's correct, yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. There is no one else left in the queue. Now, I will note that the rest of the slides in our package do also go to page 64. So now is the time where I would ask if there was anything that needed to be asked that was missed. I'll give folks a minute to reflect. I'm not seeing anything that's been missed by committee. So I believe, Mr. Haggie, that concludes capital. Okay, so I would actually take a motion that the capital budget be received for information. Could I get a mover? Moved by Councillor O'Dooney. Those in favor? And none are opposed. Very good. Thank you again, guys, for the work. Very well done. Meeting adjourned.